morning. My name is Leitch, and I'm going to be the moderator for this plenary session. The focus of this plenary session is to explore how different professional sectors have navigated disruption among both the users and clients and professionals themselves in the provision of their services. And it's hoped that this will offer some lessons for the legal profession as they strive to deal with access justice issues going forward. But before we get started with the panel, I'm just going to introduce everybody with a quick bio, starting at the end. Dan Dunsky has 25 years experience in broadcast, digital journalism, strategy, marketing, and communications. He's Vice President, Insight and Impact at Public Inc., a full-service marketing agency and consultancy, helping companies transform social impact into consumer loyalty. So prior to that, he had done Dunsky Insight, which is a strategic communications consultancy, and was the creator and executive producer of The Agenda with Steve Bacon. As an analyst, Dan has wrote on News Talk, 1010, CNN, and CTV, and has written for numerous publications, including the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, National Injustice, and National Review. Sitting next to Dan is Shannon Simmons. She is a certified financial planner, chartered investment management, and founder of the New School of Finance. She's a trailblazer in the Canadian financial planning industry and an expert in millennial finance and money in the digital world. She was named one of Canada's top 30 under 30. She's a regular financial expert in the media and has a monthly column in the Globe and Mail dealing with personal finance, and is a regular on CBC's On Money. Next to Shannon is Dr. Pinto. He's a public health and preventive medicine specialist and family physician at St. Michael's Hospital here in Toronto. He completed his residency at the University of Toronto and his master's in health policy planning financing at the London School of Economics and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Currently, he is a scientist at the St. Michael's Hospital and assistant professor at the University of Toronto. His research is focused on the evaluation of interventions that address the social determinants of health at the individual, community, and population levels. And last but not least, Renatta is a sole practitioner here in Toronto. She completed a legal education at the University of Toronto and has started her career in the municipal sector before deciding to take on public interest litigation. She is passionate about access to justice issues and primarily works with low and moderate income individuals in administrative law and child and youth law. So what I think we will do is I'm going to give everybody on the panel an opportunity to sort of open up the discussion, talk a little bit about their professional experience in the context of the state, and then we'll go from there. So we're going to start with Dan on the end.
Thank you. Can you all hear? Okay. Not yet? Is there I'll just keep on talking until...
Do you want to ask?
I can. Is this one working? No. All right. I'll switch.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. What we want to talk about is disruption, and obviously an issue that is of vital importance to the conference that you're having this week. I suppose I'll start, or just spend a couple of minutes talking about what disruption has meant to me, because yes, I lived through it, and I'm here to tell the tale. When we say digital disruption, I think it's important to start with a definition of what we mean by digital disruption. And the one that I prefer is digital disruption means the changes in business models, consumer value propositions, and social interactions caused by a change in information and communications technologies, ICT. So a change in business models, consumer value propositions, and social interactions. Practically speaking, that means that digital products have replaced or are replacing established habits in a number of areas in our lives. The way we communicate, just think of the iPhone. The way we use information for work, cloud services. The way we learn, we've heard of Coursera. The way we play, virtual reality, watch TV, Netflix, shop, Amazon, research, advanced analytics. The way we make things, 3D printing, the way we find work. I could go on and on and on. The point I want to make is I have no reason to think that digital will somehow not disrupt the legal profession. I should also say that I think, despite this short list, because I really could go on and on with that, despite that, we're still only at the very early stages of what digital disruption is going to mean for all of us. I don't think that we are anywhere near the mature stage of digital technologies. My experience with digital came quite quickly. I created a program called The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and when we launched that program in 2006, there was no such thing as Twitter. Tweeting was something that birds did. Facebook had not yet introduced its like button. So in other words, it was the Stone Age. I tried to explain what the world without a Facebook like button means to my niece the other day. It didn't work out so well. So media and journalism, media in general, journalism in particular, has been disrupted as a result of the change in ICT. As a business, media was based on a very simple economic proposition: scarcity, the law of supply and demand. We, the media providers, had something that you, the public, wanted and that you couldn't get anywhere else. That was our content, or our inventory. We monetized that content, or that inventory, generated wealth, and in the case of journalism, did some pretty good journalism along the way. But what did digital do is it commoditized that proposition. Digital took something proprietary, our content, and made it generic. All of a sudden, content was everywhere. So it was no longer scarce. And without that scarcity, our content which was once scarce enough to command a high price, was now worth about as much as cement. And I will point out one final thing about my experience, is that it was very humbling, because we, in what used to be known as traditional, or now called legacy media, used to think that we were all anybody needed when it came to the provision of news or information. The truth was, we were all anybody could get. And the last point I want to make is around the point of social interactions and what digital means for social interactions. If you go a little bit deeper into what digital disruption means, an area of particular interest to me, and one that I think that has special resonance for this audience, is what digital means for social interactions. Like all previous revolutions in information and communications technology, digital is changing our notion of authority. Homer, with his alphabet, which was a revolution in information and communication technology, displaced the authority that bards had when the dominant tradition was oral communication. Gutenberg's printing press displaced the authority of the monks who wrote the Bible and the priests who taught the Bible. The same thing is happening today. And the point that I want to leave you with, that I hope we can discuss, is that established institutions, all established institutions, including the legal institutions, will have to adapt to this revolution in ICT, in information communications technologies, or will go the way of the oral tradition and the pre-printing press world. Thank you.
Everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hi there. So I'm going to be talking about what happened in the financial industry, and given that I'm 31, you might all be thinking, what the hell do you know about what was the financial industry before? And I wouldn't disagree with you. When I started, I did start 10 years ago, and when I first graduated, right into a very fancy high net worth Bay Street firm called PHNet, which was bought out by the bank. And so working within that industry, whether it was in a supportive role and then working your way up, you definitely understood what the financial industry was all about, and the role of the expert and the planner or the investment manager or the accountant played. There were those with information and products to sell, and there were consumers who didn't really understand what they were paying, how they were paying it, or necessarily what was happening. Now at PHN, we were very transparent about that, which is what made it very special. But that's what made us special. Our experts told people what they were paying us, and everyone was very impressed. So I thought that was very crazy. And then we got bought out by one of the big banks. And so within the banking system, I also learned the levels of, I would say, discrimination that exists between different classes of people. So if you have a lot of money, you get transparency, you get ethical financial advice, you get someone telling you what's best with your money, you get lower fees. However, the further down the run, if your assets under management are not high, you get sold very expensive products that are they don't necessarily tell you exactly what you're paying in dollar cents anyways, and there are hidden fees. I'm just going to start rapping over it at some point. And there are hidden, it'll be fun. And there are hidden fees that come with that. So being young at the time and then being told to sell the product to clients who don't really fully understand what they're buying was repugnant to me and disgusting. So I pieced out of that in 2010, and that's when I started my own practice, which is called Municipal Finance. We're a fee-only financial planning firm, which means we don't sell product at all, period, full stop. So there's only 1,000 of us in Canada that actually choose this life, because it's not the most, you don't actually hold the assets, it's not as lucrative. But here's what I've learned about what's happening and why our firm, as a fee-only firm, has managed to survive this disruption and the digital age, is because hopefully we continue to evolve as well with what's being demanded from consumers given the rise of information that's available. So I do specialize in millennials, and I'm one myself, but I think that what makes me specialize in millennials, given the older model, is that with the information, what used to happen is someone would come in, you would teach them what they wanted to know, you would tell them the advice, you had all of the information, all the cards as the expert, and then they would go away trusting you as that expert, right? Well now, the freedom of information is out there. Most of my clients come in and they've already self-diagnosed, and they've already gone on Google, or they've watched this blog, or they've read this article. Yeah, I can try that on.
He's just fixing it.
That's okay? It's all right. Okay, yeah. And so they've read this article, and so now, instead of me having all of the information and them having that, the consumer is so much more empowered. They're very savvy, and this is across all ranges and all demographics. They understand how fees work, they understand what they're paying, they know what they already, or they think they know anyways, what they already want. And so my role as an expert has changed from being the teacher and the only person with information into a group conversation around what's best, and the consumer is much more involved. And as a result of this, what's happened to the expert role, and similarly to what you were saying before, what became something that was coveted and only a few people had, and precious, that you could charge a lot of money for, you now, okay, I do have a very strong from the diaphragm voice, but I can go on. I'm not shy. Musical microphones? Okay. It's okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Sweet. Sorry, guys. Of course. Yeah, right? We can just recreate the moment. Okay, so I make jokes when I'm nervous. So I'm like Chandler from Preventive. Okay, so anyway, so what was precious before that you could charge a lot of money for, whether it was fees that were being paid for products that were being sold, or even for your time and advice, which is very much the lawyer model, right? You pay for billing time. Either way, you could charge it at a premium because the access to information just wasn't there. And now we're in a world where that information is everywhere and people are giving it away for free. So your information just went down, your stock just dropped. So as a result, what's happened in the industry, what we've had to do as experts is say, okay, the consumers before didn't want all of these demands for different products. Well, now they do. They want cheaper fees. They want, there's ETFs and robo-advisors and soon-to-be robo-financial planners, which keeps me up at night. And it's technology has automated a lot of the jobs anyways. And so what happens is, I don't think that means that we're all overworked, but what that means is that we have to provide value on value on value on value. Having information no longer counts as providing value. You need to actually provide context and customization. The biggest question I get is, okay, I know all of these things. What does that mean for me? So instead of being able to bill for 10 hours of work to gather all the information and give it to someone, we now only bill for 2, right? Because that's really all they need to decipher what's important. So as a result, becoming an expert means that you also, it's a more competitive issue because who's the expert now when you have people all over the world competing to be the best, right? Do they listen to me? Do they listen to another Canadian financial planner who's also got a really high profile in the media? Like you can get access to this information all over the internet, so now you have to really distinguish yourself as an expert, whether that's through social media, or whether through your platform or how you're teaching. But the point is that the consumer wins here, which is wonderful, and at the end of the day, what we all want. But as a business owner, and especially somebody who's providing value on a fee-only or time-in basis, which is what I do as well, if you're not providing value on top of just having information, we'll all be toast. So, which is terrifying. So at the end of the day, the changes that I see in the financial industry, I think are very similar to what can and is probably happening in the law industry as well. So my only advice so far that's managed to keep me afloat and swimming is unbundling the typical package that used to be, you come in, you pay $3,500 for a fee-only financial plan. So unbundling that and saying, okay, make it more a la carte. You want a little bit of this, you want to buy a house, you want a little bit of retirement planning. Okay, so we can do all of that. So what we've had to do is become experts in microcosms of my industry. And then you have to find a niche. Because if you try to be a generalist on that T chart, there's going to be someone who's going to know more about it than you always. So instead of being a generalist in all of your areas, be a specific niche and be the best at it. And then when someone's Googling you, you'll come up as the first person that they call. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the organizers for asking me to speak. And it's always a pleasure to speak to legal audiences because many of you are familiar with my much more famous lawyer, Andrew Pinto, who is always sort of come in already thinking they're going to hear from him. But seriously, it's a great honor. It's also particularly just such an honor to speak after Dr. Blackstock, and I'm sure everybody here will sort of carry her words with you. So I was asked to speak a little bit about the health field, and of course I can only speak a bit about the part of health that I'm connected to, and I wouldn't represent all physicians or all health providers. It's an enormous sector. But where I'm situated in primary care and public health and in sort of an academic research institute, I wanted to talk about really 2 major changes that are disrupting how medicine is delivered and really how the health sector is working. It's being driven by really a set of goals called the Triple Aim, which started in the United States through the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and has been adopted by Canadian health agencies and people really all around the world. And it was really a recognition that despite pouring tons and tons of resources into health care services, we weren't getting a return on it. People were unhappy, and really everybody in the room has either been a patient or been a family member to a patient, so you know what I'm talking about. So beginning in the early 2000s, there was really a focus on we need to adopt these three goals. Increasing the patient experience, really improving how people interact with the system, what their outcomes are individually, but also just how do they feel about being served by the healthcare system. Improve population health. So it was really a recognition that it's no longer about just doing a great job with that single person in front of us. It's really about the population that we're serving. And at the same time, reduce costs or bend the cost curve. So this was sort of the ambitious goal, do all three of these things at the same time. So what has sort of helped drive this has been a focus on patient-centeredness or patient orientation. And we see this a lot in things like quality improvement processes that are now mandated that all health institutions engage in. And in fact, funding is now tied to engage with these sorts of quality improvement processes, which draw on things from ideas from industry about continuous quality improvement. And a number of the actual metrics that we're now judged on are related to patient self-reports. So, for example, at our family health team at St. Mike's, we now send out patient surveys through email to patients as well as administer them in the waiting room that ask them, when you last saw your family physician or nurse practitioner, did you feel like you had enough time? Did you feel like you had a say in the decisions? Did you feel like you could get an appointment when you needed it the last time that you were unwell or need to see someone? And these are actually reported to the Ministry of Health as part of our regular reports to them. So that's been something quite new. And some of you may be thinking, hey, I've never gotten a survey like that before. I think that over time, this is something that will be extended and will be rolled out. It's really starting in what we call like organized primary care, and it's really moving across the sector. Interestingly, the other thing about patient-centeredness and patient orientation is, of course, that patients today are much more engaged and aware of their health and really turn to Google regularly. And all of us do this, and the vast majority of patients do this. As soon as they have a health issue, they actually turn to the internet now, or they turn to forums like Facebook groups that exist. They turn to others before. So just like in sort of the other industries, physicians in the health sector are not the only repository of information. Just an aside, interesting, I just saw in the news last week, somebody did a study comparing Google to real doctors. And thankfully for now, doctors won. They actually could diagnose more accurately. But we also know that IBM and other technology companies are rapidly innovating and actually creating tools that are helpful for health providers to narrow in on what the diagnosis is. So there's a really explosion right now of digital innovation in the health sector that's already happening. So that's one process, patient sort of orientation. The other that I'll just touch on is this focus on social factors, which is, of course, near and dear to me. But it relates a lot to what we're talking about here, which is access to justice, because so many of these social factors, there's often a legal aspect to them. And many of you may know that we've been very fortunate to have a medical legal partnership at St. Mike's Family Health Team with Arch Disability and Neighborhood Legal and many other legal aid clinics. And Joanna McDonald, our amazing lawyer, is going to be speaking during this conference later today. So what drove this sort of focus on social factors was a recognition that despite universal healthcare services in places like Canada, the UK, and elsewhere, there was still enormous health inequities that were really correlated with things like income, race, ethnicity, housing status, education level. So it's prompted a lot of people to start thinking about what can we do about it? What's the role of the health sector in tackling these problems? One is through partnerships with people like the legal community, but also partnerships with others. So we're seeing a lot more of that, building relationships with other sectors to jointly tackle an issue that's influencing the health of individuals and communities. The other is for us to get more innovative in what we do. So for example, Joanna Simmons, I talked about this one example. We recognize that policy change is the ultimate way to address these social determinants of health. And so we're right now, we developed a network to focus in on one specific area called precarious work and employment. It takes advantage of this policy window that exists right now, the Change in Workplaces Review in Ontario, where the government is actually reviewing the laws. And so we thought it would be important for the health voice and patient voices to be part of that conversation. So we're trying to we developed this network over the last year and implemented it and engaged in things that health providers don't normally do, like presenting briefs to the review, looking at the evidence and engaging in advocacy around it. So all of these things, improving the patient experience, improving population health, and reducing costs, there's a real need for it to be grounded in a set of values, which are not, I would say, not universally adopted across the health sector, but they're really things like putting people at the center, people and communities at the center of their healthcare, no longer just as the passive recipients. A focus on that population level, and then a focus on social justice as well, as very tightly linked to health outcomes. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So I get to be the lawyer who sort of ties this all together, because we are, after all, at a conference which the focus is on access to justice issues. And so, as you've heard about many of the other sectors, and by the way, Shannon, super happy to meet you, because I actually did a consultation with one of your associates last month, and I was like, finally, a financial planner who gets it. Good job, I School of Finance.
That's amazing.
So, as with many of these other sectors, I think that the legal profession is also going through a period of disruption, and I think more so than perhaps any other sector, it's out of necessity. As many of you know, we have a crisis in the legal system, particularly when it comes to litigation, where we've seen an increasing number of people who can't afford to hire lawyers. I believe the current average cost for a lawyer is around $360 an hour, which is quite high. I personally would not be able to afford that, and the vast majority of people can't. I'm somewhat hesitant to even use the word disruption when we talk about some of the changes that we've been seeing, because I actually think that what we are seeing is a shift to going back to the way that law used to be practiced. We started out as a helping profession that had a mandate to help people, particularly in litigation, to help people resolve whatever disputes they were having and whatever difficulties they were having. And I think for a long time that was accessible to not everyone, but at least most people who needed to engage with legal services. I think at some point we, as a profession, perhaps lost our way a bit, and the focus became more on business and making money and creating mega firms and focusing on other things other than client services. And we found ourselves in the situation where we are today, where we bill by the hour. We bill on average, again, $364, I believe it is, per hour, which is actually quite low. I think in Toronto, that's probably what they're billing for first and second year associates. Most people can't afford legal services. We have, particularly in our court system, where I believe the number is higher than 60% in some courts of family law litigants in particular who can't afford lawyers and are self-representing themselves. So we've seen all of the other changes that we've seen more broadly, where there's more access to information about what goes on in the legal system, in the courts, etc. And I think, as in any other sector, the first place that people go to when they have an issue is they go to the internet, they seek out information elsewhere. So there's an abundance of information available. The problem, though, in the legal profession is that we have all of this information that's available to us. We have all of this disruptive technology that's around, but the rest of our legal system hasn't kept up with that. So, and I can't comment that they face. I can mostly comment on litigation. So we have all of this great technology, all of this disruption that's happening, access to more information, so that sort of the information that lawyers once held that was near and dear, that's no longer the case, it's more readily available, but our court system hasn't kept up with that. So you run into this problem where you have people who may well have a wealth of information available to them, but they're coming up against a very, very archaic court system. And so I would say, unlike some of the other sectors where you're seeing that there's a decreased need for experts and expertise, I would suggest to you that in law, it's actually the wealth of more information has actually in some ways made it more difficult for people. You have a giant pool of people who can't afford to hire lawyers, so they're forced to engage with the legal system and the court system on their own, and they have information available to them, but our legal system is so complex and so archaic that the information that they have is actually in many cases not helpful to them, because they're up against a system that, quite frankly, need 1, 2, perhaps 3 degrees. In fact, I actually think that there needs to be a separate degree on just navigating the court system, because even as a lawyer, I find it challenging at times to navigate the court system and understand procedure and understand all of that. So I would say, unlike some of the other sectors, I think that what you're seeing in law is that there continues to be a role for lawyers, in part because of the archaic nature of our legal system, but also because I think lawyers bring value to the table in terms of the work that we do. So then the question becomes, if perhaps unlike some of these other sectors, we're not seeing this diminished need for expertise that lawyers bring, what then is the solution? And as I've said, I actually think that what we're seeing is many lawyers going back to what was at the core of our profession before we sort of lost our way, as I would say. So you're seeing lawyers who are doing a number of different innovative things, not complete solutions by any means, but things that will help to address some of the issues that we're facing. So one, and this is happening in the financial services sector as well, is unbundled legal services. So it's not a perfect solution because it's, so unbundled legal services, unlike 30 years ago when someone came to you and they said, I have a legal matter, and you paid them a certain amount of a deposit, and they go behind the scenes and do the work and send you a giant bill at the end of it. It's looking at a legal matter and trying to break it down into discrete components and explaining to somebody, here's what I can do for you, this is what it will cost you based on the amount of time or the value that you're getting from this, and here are other parts of this that you may not want to pay for. There may be more cost-efficient ways of doing things. You can do it, you might be able to do some of these things yourselves. So the unbundled legal services is one sort of response that we're seeing to problem solving. Again, it's not a complete solution because at the end of the day, often you're still leaving people who, again, don't have the expertise to fully navigate what remains a very complex system to help them effectively take advantage of those unbundled legal services. So it's a solution for some people who might be a little bit more sophisticated, but not for all. What you're also seeing, and I think that this is where we really are getting back to the core of what we do as lawyers, is I think you're seeing many, many firms moving away from the large firm structure that comes with a lot of overhead, a lot of, they have overhead, pricey, fancy things that people can't afford to pay for. And I think you're seeing a return to small firm models where people within the context of small firms and solo practices are looking for solutions to help make legal services more affordable. And how they're doing that is they're engaging with other forms of disruptive technology, which has been fantastic in my own practice, collaborating with people in other industries that are using disruptive technologies and disruptive forces, and figuring out how to make that work to deliver legal services to people in a way that's more efficient. So whether that means instead of having a lawyer travel to to a client's location or vice versa, engaging in some sort of technology to facilitate the exchange of documents, meetings with clients, all of those things to help to reduce the cost so that people can continue to get the legal services that they need, to get the expertise, but to help eliminate a lot of those things that there are a lot of filler things and procedural things that end up adding a lot of money to the cost of somebody's legal bill. And so we've seen by the introduction and use of technology that it's helped to eliminate many of those costs. Again, not perfect solutions, but it's helping to address the problem. Ultimately though, again, because our court system has not kept up with the broader changes that are going on, there has to be reforms on that end of things as well. And some of it, what I will say, it's out of necessity. Lawyers and as a legal profession, we either need to adapt or perish, because the next solution, I think, is that because there continues to be this need for experts and people can't afford the experts, I think the next question, and I think it's a legitimate question anyway, that the public is going to start asking is, are these things that we need lawyers to be doing? And I think, again, I'm not a family lawyer, but I see that as an area in particular where I think people are going to start saying, do we really need to have lawyers involved when a marriage is breaking down or we're trying to decide custody and access issues? Because we can't afford them. Maybe we just need to not bother with the legal system entirely and go look somewhere else for solutions. And that's a problem, I think, for not only for the legal profession, but for access to justice issues more generally, because at the end of the day, I do think that the court system and lawyers, that we play a role in protecting people's rights, and especially where there might be power imbalances in relationships. And I do worry that when people start looking outside of the legal system for solutions, that might create a separate access to justice issue for people as well. So I will leave it at that, because I think I went over 4 minutes.
Well, I think this is actually really interesting because there's a couple of themes that are sort of percolating through all 4 conversations, which I thought we could sort of delve into a little deeper. And I'm going to start with Renatta because it's also my context. Was a practicing lawyer for about 10 years. But after that, I did doctoral research on self-reps and access to justice. And something that you said struck me. In the course of my interviews with the self-reps, one of the things that they would often say is, I can go home and look on Panelists, the sort of public website for case law, and I can get the rules of civil procedure. But typically what happens is when I come into a self-help clinic to get some assistance as a self-rep, I'm told that's not how law is practiced. So if I say I'm able to, as a self-rep, I'm able to note my opponent in default because he's missed the deadline, I'm typically told by a volunteer lawyer that no, that's not the appropriate course of action, that's not what lawyers do. And so there was a big disconnect for a lot of the self-reps between what they were able to figure out on their own and
it's a good question, a set of questions that goes to the heart of what we're talking about here. The short answer as to the challenges and how should we respond to the challenges, I have no idea. And I really don't believe that anybody has any idea. I really do use the term revolution lightly because, or rarely because, not lightly, rarely because I do think that the term gets thrown around quite a bit too often. But if we think of a revolution as an overthrowing of the established order, then I really do think that this moment in time in information and communication technology is a revolution. The challenge that we have right now is that, and everybody in our short presentations used the word authority, and authority is bound up with the notion of information, because when you're within one dominant or accepted, socially accepted information system, we do come to a consensus. We have seemed historically to come to a consensus about who is and who is not an authority. Yes, that didn't represent everybody, but there was a consensus. The challenge right now is that there is no consensus about who is or what is deemed to be authoritative, who is an authority and what is deemed to be authoritative. And we've all seen that in the various areas that we've talked about. So when we talk about the challenges, what this means to me is, look, I'm a liberal Democrat. I believe that individual empowerment is a good thing. But I'm also aware that it's going to take an awful lot of time until a new status quo around information and the provision of information is accepted, until we find a new consensus. Until then, we're going to be living in a very messy time when it comes to how we use information, how we gather information, and how we negotiate these multiple sets of authorities amongst ourselves. So, you know, we've all given examples from our individual fields. You know, it's very interesting that a little while ago I was moderating an issue precisely on a medical issue that was raised here, and that is so you know, the notion is, of course, a well-informed patient is a better patient, is a good patient. I'm assuming the same goes for law. A well-informed client is a good client. However, the clinicians that I was speaking with at this event that I was facilitating were saying that a growing amount of their clinic time was taken up with correcting misinformation that their patients had been getting online. And that's a problem, right? It's one thing to say that, you know, my physician is no longer the sole authority, that's fine, but I would not want a non-physician to perform surgery on me. And I think that goes without saying. But at the same time, there's going to be increasing demands on, say, physicians to incorporate the information that I am gathering on my own into my health history, into my treatment plan. And that is going to be, the healthcare system is absolutely not set up for that right now. What's the equivalent in the legal system? What is the equivalent for me as a client to come to you with information and to make that part of my my legal work that I do with you? It may vary. I just don't know the legal system well enough to know if that's something that's happening already. But that's a bit of the way that I tend to look at the challenges around the disaggregation of authority.
Okay, so I think some of the, for me, especially my experience within how people relate to their financial advisor or expert, the problems that can arise from the abundance of free information out there is kind of similar to what you were saying. My fear, if prices to get financial advice remain typically inaccessible to people. So the very similar problem in law is typically, if you want to get unbiased advice, it's very expensive to do so. So if we don't bring that down and we have this plethora of free advice out there, you can't actually give advice. You have to speak in general terms and information terms on the internet. So things are like, hey, these are the general how-tos, but check in with your professional, because that's like how they get out of it. And so when you have people who are reading an abundance of information, I almost think that it's death by 1,000 choices. How do you know which blog relates to you? How do you know which one to trust? And the other problem is that in the age of everyone can be an expert, everyone can have a YouTube channel, everyone can be a Twitter magnet, that who are you getting your advice from is actually a problem that I see all the time. One of my pet peeves is when people take financial advice from bloggers. I'm like, no, please no. And so that's one of the problems. And then the second issue that I see coming down the pipeline in the financial industry specifically is as we automate more and more, so we have robo-advisors are all the rage, and I think they're great for the record. Robo-planning is coming like any day now. And so, but one of the problems with that is that anyone who's offering these services, robo-planning for example, for free, I say this in huge, massive quotations, nothing's free. So what is happening on the back end? Well, what I'm worried about and what I suspect will happen is if we have a free financial plan, it's going to just be the same system as before, where you have a free information that's just leading you down the path to buy these specific products, but with really good marketing and branding, and it's free, and that's how it's advertised. You may, somebody who's not necessarily financially literate and educated in what's happening on the back end of the business side for that startup or for that company is still being advertised to and sold something at the end of the day, which may not be a product that they actually need. And so that need for unbiased advice and for untrusted experts still will exist. I think that the problem is that we have too much information and we have almost too much focus on free and cheap and the very bottom line, so that we might end up what looks like providing more access to information, which is good for the consumer, could down the road potentially be not great, because if all of your options are just bigger banks selling you things with nice packaging, then I don't know if that's a win, right? So I think the only way forward is if we continue to have experts who are aware and evolve and keep their costs low, very much like what you're saying. Now I haven't even been to new school. So we're a completely paperless office, and we do online stuff all the time, and whatever we can do to keep our overhead low so we can offer very low fees within their industry. And so I think that is the only way forward within the financial industry anyways, is to still be helpful and to still provide unbiased financial advice to people, so that they don't end up getting so much information and then feeling like they still shouldn't get a planner, because honestly I'd love to, but it's $3,500, so I'm just going to read this blog and get this free app, and hopefully whatever this insurance product is that's waiting for me at the end of the rainbow is correct for me, and click, right? So that's my fear. So we just need to, I think that it comes down to very much what you were saying, and just keeping overhead costs low and trying to keep the actual billable hours low, so that people will still engage your services even though they have all the information.
I won't spend too much time on the point about the amount of misinformation that's out there. I think we're all aware of the health. There's tons of stuff on the internet, and doctors are quite frustrated often when we have to sort of sort through what is true and what's not. I think actually the solution to that is pointing patients to credible sources, which now there are a fair number. I wanted to talk a bit about one issue which I think cuts across all of this, which is the inequity in terms of accessing this information, whether it's health or legal or whatever it is, or financial. Because the patients that I often see, in my inner city practice are people who are homeless, shelters, are living on OESP or OW, and don't have access, ready access to the internet, may not have an operating phone. And so they are, as we move rapidly forward to giving people like tons of access to very rich resources and even access to their entire medical records or communicating with people via email and the internet. I really worry about how we're increasing this divide between people who tend to be lower income, lower educational attainment, and those who are wealthy. We know that actually in Ontario, people who are wealthy access specialists at a far higher rate, are far more likely to get procedures, are far more likely to take up preventive care measures like cancer screening, are far more likely to access things like smoking cessation, and of course can afford their medications. So this is part of how the health system is actually driving growing inequities and why a man who lives at the lowest end of the income spectrum is going to die something like 10 to 12 years earlier than someone who's at the highest level. So I think the health sector has to think a lot about how we're going to tackle that. And I don't think that we're doing enough to really think that through. One sort of solution is to think about, if we think about time as the most limited resource, is actually shifting the amount of time that we spend with our people who need more time, and actually saving time by using technology to say, instead of calling in every patient for a 15-minute appointment, why not use email or telephone, or have a nurse or another member of the staff actually interact with the people who can take up that sort of service. They don't need to come in. And then the folks who, we can't get them to, we can't reach them, and they actually need a half an hour to sort of explain things. Why aren't we sort of adjusting it? I'll give one really big challenge, which is the issue of illiteracy. So we know that in Canada there's a large spectrum of literacy, and a large number of adults actually are illiterate or working illiterate and can't process what's on their prescription medications or information we give. But it may surprise you that in the health sector we have no tools to actually assess literacy. We have no training on how to ask people about their literacy. And we're actually, most providers are not sure where to refer someone who is an adult who has problems with literacy. And that's just one example of how if we don't think about those things, then we're just going to really fail those patients in terms of improving their health. So this issue of access and free, we just always have to be mindful. It's not at all reaching everybody universally. So how do we try to tackle that?
Maybe I will just briefly touch on the inequity piece of things, because I think that that's a big part of our access to justice issue that we're facing in the legal profession. It's not, and again, Andrew was talking about in the health sector that it's often people who are on the far margins who don't have access to information and face the greatest challenges when it comes to accessing health services. In the legal profession, it's slightly different, I think, because of the availability of legal aid, and so that does provide some access to services. And whether or not it's adequate is up for debate. I would suggest that it's not, but at least there's something available for people in the areas that generally touch on their lives, so family, immigration, and criminal, that have the greatest impact on them. And the cutoff for legal aid is actually ridiculously low. It's like half of what would be considered minimum wage. It's absolutely ridiculous when you think about the fact that a lawyer on average costs $364 an hour. But I think what we're seeing when it comes to access to justice, it's the people who don't qualify for legal aid, and maybe they're making the minimum wage or slightly more, and they're somehow expected to be able to come up with money to pay for a lawyer who's billing on an hourly basis. So we have a justice system that works somewhat well if you're extremely, extremely poor, making less than $13,000 a year. And it works really, really well if you are wealthy and you can afford to paid the best, or any lawyer, quite frankly, by the hour. But it's the vast majority of people who are in between who simply cannot afford to pay for a lawyer, and we don't have a solution to it. And one of the things that I find really bizarre about it is, as somebody who came from working in politics for a long time, one of the big things that you do, the sort of selling point, is you talk about the middle class and the needs of the middle class, and that's just what people, that helps you win elections. And it seems like in the legal profession, and I actually think that lawyers were probably one of the professions that I think we genuinely care about the needs of the poorest of the poor. And I actually find that lawyers do a better job of advocating for access for people who are on the extreme margins. There's nobody who's sort of advocating for the rest of everyone else. The wealthy do a good job of protecting their own interests, I think, across the board, but there just doesn't seem to be very many people, and I know there are wonderful projects that are going on right now, like the National Self-Represented Litigants Project, etc. But just sort of more generally in the public discourse, there doesn't seem to be any sort of an advocate or a champion for the vast majority of people who can't afford legal services. And then just so to wrap it up in terms of getting back to some of the challenges around the expanded information, access to information that we have, the reality is, again, as I was suggesting before, despite the wealth of information that's out there, the common law is a tricky beast. We don't have a type of legal system where you go look in the law book and you'll find the answer to your question. It doesn't work like that. The common law is dynamic, it's evolving, it's constantly changing. In order to really become an expert, you need to know how to read a case and understand what the case says and how it fits in with other cases and things like that. So the vast majority of people are not going to be able to have that skill set. They might be able to, you might with some coaching through unbundled legal services, be able to get them to a place where they can understand the basics of what they need to do. But again, we're dealing with a legal system that is incredibly complex. I think in many areas unnecessarily complex. I think there are many things that we can deal with that doesn't require the lengthy sort of analysis that we go through as lawyers. But that's what you're faced with. So all of this information is out there, and that chunk of people, the vast majority of people who are in the middle class that can't, or just slightly above the poverty line, who can't afford to pay for lawyers, they have access to that information, but they don't have the skill set to do something with that information that will help them to resolve whatever their issue is.
Okay, well, we're actually almost out of time, but I thought maybe there's some really interesting things that everybody has raised, and I thought I would just touch on 3 things to think about going forward. So the first is really sort of the wealth of information, misinformation, and too much information, and what that means for the role of the expert going forward. Obviously, change in the role in terms of what service they're providing to the individual that does come into their office with a certain amount of information. So that's a really, I think, challenging point for all the professional sectors. And certainly something that the legal profession is struggling with as well. The second is the interrelationship between people's needs. So we've got a host of different professional sectors sitting here, all of whom I think we have to stop looking at as silos. And I think, Andrew, you were raising this point, is that there are social factors involved in health issues, and there are often non-legal issues involved in assisting someone with their legal problem. And I think that for the expert, it's time to stop looking at it as a silo